Hey guys, this is Emily, and you are about to listen to a clip from episode number 6 of Playing the Glass Bead Game. In this episode, we did a little timeline travel. We revisited sort of a prior discussion about a game player through the synchronicities I encountered on a recent vacation. And we also addressed tennis journalist Joel Drucker with an explanation of what the glass bead game is and how we play it, and extended an invitation for him to play. And that is the clip you guys are about to see right now. If you are interested in receiving the entire episode of playing the glass bead game, instructions on how to do so is in the description box below. And if you would like to receive a complimentary episode and have not yet, just contact me by email and we will make that happen. All right, here we go.
It being empty on the inside. But it was June 21st, 2020. It was last summer solstice. And I remember exactly what I did on last summer solstice. I was living in the church. It was when like all of this weird stuff was going on with Joe Biden. And I'm like, timeline jump number 2.
Yeah.
Because like all that sort of stuff. So like I'm going back in time. I'm looking at where I was at that time. And I haven't looked at the laptop yet to see what's on it because, you know, I just jumped on this call. But that's where I've been, like this weird timeline stuff. And I know we talked about some other things, which we're going to get to today. And I'm excited because it continues to play into the topics, which you said you want to talk. So I'm really excited. We're moving time. We're making these connections. Like this is going to be a great show. I'm super psyched.
All right. So I got a lot of stuff today, but I do what you said. So a couple things. First of all, it would be interesting to go back and see when our first episode of Project Kids was. And I suspect it may have been somewhere around that period of time, right? Or that when we really started to find our footing and sort of starting to declare what we were doing on a certain level.
It was definitely in June. Because I was in the church.
Okay. Yes. Right. So that, yes. Okay. So that period of time. And then as for your thing with the astrology, so if you did this last week we went and took a recommendation that you made about a month ago. And it, in some ways, took us right back to what we were talking about a month ago, which is Elisa Lam, right? So it's interesting and a new version of it, like a completely different way of looking at the same stuff that happened, but like from this other perspective, and like, oh my God, the game is even a little different than what we imagined, right? Kind of thing. But literally, I think it was about a month ago that we talked about Elisa Lam here. And then I generated all these other iterations that I did with other people and different kinds of stuff. So we're going to be circling back to that. But so there was two things that there was a couple of things that generated what I'm going to share here today. So let's do this first though. I want to give a little feedback on, so I'm looking for ways that the game plays back with us. And one of the things that I have noticed over the last couple of weeks is there's a gentleman, and if you see this is for you, Joel Drucker. There's a gentleman named Joel Drucker who's a tennis journalist who is part of a 3-way podcast that I watch sometimes called 3. It's 3 tennis analysts getting together to talk about the big 3, Federer, Djokovic, and Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, right? And for some reason, the way that Joel Drucker has been analyzing Roger Federer's return to playing over the last couple of weeks has led me to believe that either he has read the book, The Glass Bead Game, or he is kind of a glass bead game player himself, whether or not he knows it, right? So I just asked him in the comment section of their most recent episode whether he had read the book, The Glass Bead Game. And he responded, which I haven't had, I was away for the weekend, so I haven't had a chance to respond yet. So this video is the response. We'll clip this out and send it to him. He said, no, I've read a little bit of Hermann Hesse, but I have not read that. Please tell me more. And a couple of other people chimed in and said, oh yeah, great book and whatever, right? So I thought maybe we could do our best to sort of let Joel know, like, at least what our perception of the glass bead game is and how we play it, right? So I'll kind of maybe give my thoughts and then you can kind of jump in and add. Joel Drucker, this is my friend Michael Wan. We play the glass bead game together. So it's a book by Herman Hesse that we are still in the process of reading. But when it was brought to our attention by a listener of our other show, we realized that we were glass bead game players and we started playing with intent. And so the book is basically set in the future, and it's about a young gentleman who goes off to sort of an academy for people who are like really sort of exceptional in a way, but what they're, like it's not that, oh, they're just the best at this. They're kind of, they have, my way of describing it would be like they have like a broad sort of understanding and ability to apply the 7 liberal arts, being the trivium and the quadrivium, to whatever their main sort of pursuit or task is. And so in this kid's case, he's a musician, right? And so they go away to this academy where they basically are kind of taking what is a culture that has gotten so decadent that it's become garbage and trying to synthesize it into something meaningful. And each person sort of has a different way that they do this. And they refer to this as playing the glass bead game. And we are both trying to understand exactly what they meant by this, but also sort of declaring some of our own meanings of this game and the way in which we do it. And the way in which we do it is we take a look at, what's going on socially, politically, with music, with sports, pop culture, things from the sort of conspiracy or like Black projects, mind control world, which Michael and I both have an interest in. And we sort of pluck from all of these areas in which we are well-versed and sort of create a strand of beads. Like every time we, kind of have a little nugget. And for us, a nugget is when things from the inner realm and the outer realm, or the imaginal realm and the real world realm, synchronize in a particular way. Some people call it synchromysticism. It sort of forms a bead and we put that on the string and we're trying to make sort of the most interesting, strand of beads or like you could, another way to look at it is like a quilt with many, many patches. And we're sort of taking, I think we'd all agree that our culture has become decadent to the point of being garbage, but there's still a lot of personal meaning one can take from it. It's fun to play. And it also starts to reverberate out in a way that like we begin to understand that we can augment reality. So I think that's maybe the best. And for me, tennis is one of the best like game boards for this game. And I would argue that the difference, because I know that your guys' podcast is about Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, and obviously we would all agree that there's something different about them than the rest of the tennis players. And the difference, I would argue, is that they are playing the glass bead game while the others are playing tennis. There have been a few other players that I've watched over the years that I think are maybe glass bead game players from an intellectual and artistic standpoint, but they don't have maybe the physical goods or the to sort of back it up and become a top player. Someone like this would be like Janko Tipsarevic, or maybe even a David Nalbandian, or there's a few others, right? And the only one that I see of the younger generation that sort of inspires that same idea in me is right now is maybe Daniil Medvedev. I'm not sure yet with some of the others, right? But the other guys that are sort of top guys, but not part of the top 3, they're not playing the glass bead game, right? So I think that's maybe the difference. That's sort of the je ne sais quoi. So Michael, please add to that.
First of all, like, the way you can pronounce those names, like I've got a great deal of admiration and envy, because I just struggle with names and they just rolled off your tongue very well. So first off, like, as we're talking about Drucker, I pulled up and just read his bio on his website.
I know almost nothing about him, so yes. So
I'm sorry?
I know almost nothing about him because I just got to know him from this show a few months ago. So I've never. So
undoubtedly, like, he's like playing around with the concept, because he seems to have like an area of his range of expertise includes sports, popular culture, and business. And he's written for a whole variety of like top tier magazines. And I'm seeing like the books that he wrote, and primarily they're about sports and they're about people. And then he also wrote a book which is a portrait of his 28-year romance with his late wife. And I'm a romantic. I'm a sucker. So like, when I see stuff like that, like, I like the guy immediately. So, and you have to have heart. You have to have heart. There's an emotionality which connects into the glass bead game. So let me, I'll share like my take on at least how it's presented. So, the book, The Glass Bead Game, is considered the finest book by Hesse. And, I've read, I guess, a handful of these books and like that are always like, the classics, the best books. And like, I read them and I'm always like, why is this the best book? I don't get it. But I know there's a reason why. And there's sometimes, whether it's Catcher in the Rye or 1984, you could look at for some other reasons, but this book is on that list. So like when this book came into our lives, and it came into our lives in this very, very like, synchronistic and mystical way, I'm looking at all these different sort of angles and I'm like, why is this so important? So the book itself is, it's kind of dry. I'm about 200 pages into it. Now I'm really starting to get into the character, but nonetheless, what the idea of this, glass bead game being played by these like intellectuals who are kept away from the rest of society, is that they are in the most poetic and artistic, yet at the same time, most tangible way. They're drawing connections between things that are normally not considered connected. So like the example, which I was reading about just the other day, was how this one particular player, and they never go into it. They never really explain it. It's just like the entire book is like flirting with this idea of the glass bead game, but never fully explaining to the reader what it is, or at least it hasn't gotten into that in the first 200 pages. And to me, this plays into why, why this book is on that list of like some of the finest literature ever created, is because of the significance of it. So the example which I just read about was how this one glass bead player was able to correlate like some aria, because they're all musicians. Music is the foundation of the glass bead game, with the orbits of the planets, or maybe something, maybe stellar, something with outer space. But they were able to show this very, very great, this great connection, this undeniable connection. Like, this is beyond coincidence. And so the point of it, where or at least the point which I'm taking, and what makes sense to me, is the book is without saying so in explicit words, is it's talking about the interconnectedness of all of life, and the very act of playing the game. And what is playing the game? The game is being able to find these connections in the most like beautiful and artistic way. The very act of doing that, first it changes the individual. It changes the individual in the fact that it further tightens their intellect, their perception, their consciousness, to be aware of the interconnectivity of everything. And to me, that's like, that's why this book would be so important, because like it's teaching people that sort of thing. So the book came out, like, I don't know, like I think it was written in the 30s and it was released after World War II, I believe. But now in our modern time, with what's going on in this, through like, the rise of conspiracy theory and synchro-mysticism and all this stuff where people are like, this is connected to this and all of that. What we're seeing is this natural, like through the medium of the internet, where we can get information like so friggin' quickly. An example of someone who did this before would have been like Robert Anton Wilson, when he wrote a lot of his books in the 70s. Like the amount of research that dude had to have done in a library would have taken like, 2 weeks for like something which we can do right now on the internet in like 2 minutes. And so like we are in this new space right now, and you and I have been doing this. We've been doing this. Other people have been doing this, like finding the interconnectivity of things without necessarily like a purpose, without necessarily like, what are we trying to do with it, other than realizing this interconnectedness in this like most beautiful way. we're touching upon this thing which has always been known, which has always been touched upon by certain people who are able to experience and see reality in like a greater way. And the reason why you say in the book is like how it pulls, how it is to by playing the glass bead game in a way during a time of a very a debased culture, is that by finding the elegance and the beauty behind life on the deeper levels, it's like, it's life unfolding upon itself. So the last thing I want to say before I hand it back is like, so then, what happens is the players of it, they play with the topics which are of interest to them. This is where this whole idea of like, you got to care about it. It can't be like things which aren't interesting to you. It's the stuff that like you're interested in. And for you, it's very much within tennis. And so what you've done, I think, particularly with the big three, is you've identified like what might be called it's a quantum physics term. Is it called attractors, vector attractors?
Yeah.
And so like these certain larger than life individuals, like whether we see that in entertainment, whether we see that in athleticism, or we see that in any other way, like they're like creating something on the fabric of reality, which is even greater. And so it's like they become more exciting to watch. And as we connect with it, and we connect with it with like awareness and attention, like there then becomes a feedback loop. There becomes this conversation with reality, but through like the movements of reality, not through the clouds, not through like, the trees, but like, the unfolding of culture itself. And so, I think that the way you set up this podcast, the three, is a really kind of interesting way of seeing how it's being played, maybe unconsciously with three individuals. And three has always been a very important thing. And then I'm going to also drop this one on you, Emily. I'm going to suggest with the show, which we're going to be doing with Howdy.
Yeah.
On Thursday, we're going to be tapping into that same sort of magic of analyzing something from three different perspectives.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to wrap up this segment for Joel by letting him know that, I use tennis a lot to both analyze things on the larger world stage. I think it's like a good microcosm of a macrocosm. And so that naturally came into this show that Michael and I do on a repetitive basis. And so at this point, tennis is part of every episode we do. And we refer to many tennis players, but most commonly Roger Federer, not because he's my favorite, he's not, Nadal is, but because he seems to be the easiest one to get feedback from. So, a few months back, it was kind of like, after he dropped out of the Australian Open, we don't know what's going to happen with Roger. Maybe he'll retire. We did an episode where we mostly talked about him. We were talking about the connection between inner processes in the body and outer expressions in terms of like social, financial, or like in this case, sports world movement. And we were talking about the ATP in the body, which is the current, like the basically energy of life, the currency of life, as like a parallel inside the body to the ATP tour in the outer world. And we were discussing Roger Federer, and we were talking about timelines and storylines and characters. And quite literally the day after, or later the day after we made the video, a video comes out from the ATP tour about the story of Roger Federer and the character that he played. So it was almost like through the metaphysics and the synchronicity of the internet, like he began a loop playing back with us, and we've gotten response in some weird way almost every time. So we're enjoying this ability to sort of weave synchronicities and whatnot. And that is why we always talk a little bit about tennis. And so this was our tennis content for the day. And we invite you to continue playing the glass bead game on yourself that you've been playing all along, but now play with intent and see what it brings to you. And also, if you'd ever like to play with us, drop us a line and let us know. We'd be happy to have you. All right, Joel. All right, so carrying on with the show, I'm going to clip that part out. That will serve as probably the promo for the show, but also I will drop that into the comment section of the three. And it would actually be really interesting if we can start, getting some interesting side weaves or side reels like the astrology you were telling us about earlier that sort of recasts the a new timeline, right? Like it casts a new timeline from the same sort of ball of thread you had been playing with, right? So anywho,